Nathaniel Cole didn't expect silence to be so loud. The elevator doors opened onto the 42nd floor of his Park Avenue penthouse, and the city greeted him through floor-to-ceiling glass, Manhattan glittering, relentless, alive. It was nearly dawn. His jacket was still warm from another body, another room, another version of himself he preferred to believe existed only at night. He loosened his tie, stepped inside, and froze. The lights were off. Charlotte always left a lamp on when he was late, always. It was her quiet way of pretending not to worry. He flicked on the switch. The living room came into focus, pristine, untouched, almost staged. No throw blanket on the sofa. No half-read book on the marble coffee table. No faint hum from the espresso machine she used every morning, even now, even 7 months pregnant. Then he saw it.
A small velvet box placed precisely at the center of the table.
Nathan's breath caught. He knew that box. He'd bought it years ago, on a reckless afternoon when he still believed love could be proven with objects. He set his phone down, fingers suddenly clumsy, and lifted the lid. Inside lay a pair of diamond earrings. Not flashy, not oversized. Elegant. The kind Charlotte wore only on days that mattered. Their wedding. Her first ultrasound appointment. The charity gala where she stood beside him while investors shook his hand and congratulated him on becoming a man worth knowing. Beneath the earrings was a folded sheet of paper. His name was written on the front. Neat, steady, no smudges, no hesitation. For a moment, Nathan didn't open it. He told himself this was a misunderstanding. Charlotte was emotional. Pregnancy did that. She'd probably gone to stay with her sister for a night, maybe 2. He could fix this. He always fixed things. But the apartment told a different story. Her coat was gone from the entryway. The framed sonogram that used to sit on the console table was missing. Even the faint lavender scent she favored had been replaced by something sterile, like a room after checkout. Nathan unfolded the paper. The words didn't scream. They didn't accuse. They didn't beg. They landed quietly. And that was worse. By the time he reached the last line, the city outside felt very far away. He read it again, then a third time. A sharp laugh escaped his throat, brittle and wrong. This couldn't be real. Charlotte wouldn't leave without a scene, without tears, without asking him to choose. Except she had. His phone buzzed. A message from Vivian, bright and careless, asking if he'd made it home safe. A photo followed. Champagne flutes, a silk bedsheet. Her smile cropped just enough to feel intimate. Nathan stared at the screen, then back at the earrings. For the first time that night, something unfamiliar crawled up his spine. Fear. Because in that perfect, silent penthouse, Nathan Cole realized the truth he had been avoiding all along. This wasn't a threat. This wasn't a test. His pregnant wife hadn't left to punish him. She had left because she was done. Nathan sat down slowly, the letter trembling between his fingers like it carried weight beyond paper. The penthouse felt unfamiliar now, as if it belonged to someone else, someone Charlotte had already erased from her life. He read it again, forcing himself to slow down. By the time you read this, I will be gone, not because I was weak, not because I didn't try, but because I finally listened to the truth you've been showing me for months. There was no anger in the handwriting, no jagged lines or rushed strokes. Charlotte had written this carefully, deliberately. That realization unsettled him more than rage ever could. Nathan swallowed and continued. I used to believe love meant patience. That if I waited quietly, if I supported you, if I made myself smaller, You would eventually see me again. But love should not feel like loneliness shared with another person. He scoffed under his breath. Smaller. He had given her everything. The apartment, the lifestyle, the security. Didn't that count for something? Yet his eyes kept moving. I know about the nights you said were meetings. I know about the hotel rooms that smelled like a stranger's perfume. I didn't confront you because I needed to be sure of one thing first. Whether I was still willing to lose myself to keep you. Nathan felt his chest tighten. He had assumed she didn't know. Or worse, he had assumed it didn't matter if she did. I am 7 months pregnant. Every decision I make now carries a heartbeat inside it. I cannot raise a child in a home where silence hurts more than shouting, and loyalty is treated like an inconvenience. He stood abruptly, pacing the room. The city outside kept moving, indifferent. Horns blared far below. A siren wailed, then faded. Life continued, uncaring. This is not revenge. I'm not leaving to punish you. I am leaving because staying would teach our child the wrong lesson. That love requires humiliation. That commitment means endurance without dignity. Nathan's throat went dry. The letter wasn't dramatic. That was the problem.
It didn't give him anything to fight against. You will probably tell yourself I overreacted. That pregnancy made me emotional. That I will come back once I calm down. I won't.
His phone buzzed again on the table. He didn't look at it this time. I am taking only what belongs to me. My self-respect, my child, and the future I refuse to beg for. Please do not look for me. If you ever loved me, let this be the last thing you give freely. The signature was simple. Charlotte. No hearts, no last plea, no promise to talk. Nathan lowered himself onto the couch, the leather cold beneath his palms. For the first time since he'd stepped into that apartment, panic replaced arrogance. Because the letter made one thing painfully clear. Charlotte hadn't left hoping he would change. She had left after deciding he never would. There was a time when Nathan Cole used to come home early.
Back then, the penthouse didn't feel like a trophy. It felt like a home.
Charlotte remembered how the light would spill across the hardwood floors in the late afternoon, how the city outside looked softer when viewed from their living room instead of a boardroom. Nathan would loosen his tie, drop his briefcase by the door, and pull her into a hug that felt unhurried, real. They had laughed more then. Charlotte used to tease him about his obsession with control, about how even on weekends he scheduled his hours like a meeting agenda. He would roll his eyes and kiss her forehead, promising that once the company stabilized, things would slow down. That promise lived between them like a shared dream. When she found out she was pregnant, Nathan lifted her off the floor and spun her around, careless and joyful.
He had talked to her stomach every night for weeks, telling their unborn child about the skyline, about ambition, about how anything was possible if you worked hard enough. Charlotte had believed him, not because he was powerful, but because he sounded sincere. But success changed the temperature of the room. Meetings multiplied. Dinners were postponed. Phone calls followed him into bed. Charlotte began eating alone more often than not, staring at the reflection of city lights in the glass while her food went cold. Nathan always had an explanation. A deal closing, an investor in town. Just one more week. She adjusted. She always did. Charlotte told herself this was adulthood, that marriages evolved, that love didn't disappear, it simply grew quieter. She stopped asking questions that made him sigh, stopped mentioning how lonely she felt when he checked emails during conversations, stopped pointing out that he hadn't touched her stomach in days.
When her body began to change, She noticed how his gaze shifted. Not openly cruel, just distracted, less patient. He would kiss her cheek instead of her lips, claim exhaustion instead of desire. She told herself it was temporary, that pregnancy was an adjustment for both of them. The night she went to her first ultrasound alone, she cried in the parking garage afterward. Not because something was wrong with the baby, but because something was wrong with the marriage, and she could finally feel it. Nathan still brought gifts home, jewelry, flowers, apologies wrapped in expensive gestures, but they felt transactional, like compensation for absences he didn't want to explain. Charlotte accepted them because it was easier than admitting they were already drifting apart.
The first time she smelled unfamiliar perfume on his jacket, she said nothing.
The second time, she washed it herself. The third time, she stopped pretending. What hurt most wasn't the betrayal she suspected. It was the realization that the man she loved no longer saw her as a partner, just a chapter he had already outgrown. By the time Charlotte stopped asking where he'd been, the marriage had already learned how to survive without honesty. And Nathan, convinced silence meant peace, never noticed that his wife was quietly preparing to leave the life she once built around him. Vivian Hart liked places where people watched her without realizing they were doing it. The bar at the Plaza Hotel was perfect for that. Low light, polished wood, men who measured worth by reflections, and women who understood how to sit so they were seen before they were heard.
Vivian crossed her legs slowly, the silk of her dress catching just enough light to matter. Nathan sat across from her, distracted, scrolling through emails on his phone. She smiled anyway. Vivian didn't need his full attention. Not yet. She studied him the way she always did, not as a lover, but as an asset. Nathan Cole was valuable. A rising name in fintech, Park Avenue address, access to rooms she wanted to enter without being asked who she knew. He wore power the way some men wore cologne, assuming it was attractive simply because it existed. She leaned forward slightly. "You're quiet tonight." Nathan glanced up. "Long week." "That's what you said last week." Her tone was light, almost amused, not accusatory. Vivian never cornered. She nudged. He smirked. "Occupational hazard." Vivian lifted her glass, watching the city reflect against the window behind him.
"You know," she said casually, "people at the firm are starting to notice how much you carry everything alone." He stiffened, just slightly, enough. She continued, "They admire it, but they also worry. A man with your reach shouldn't be tied down by complications." Nathan didn't respond. He didn't have to. Vivian had learned long ago that silence was often agreement disguised as restraint. She knew about Charlotte. Of course she did. Vivian knew Charlotte was pregnant. She knew Charlotte stayed home. Knew she didn't attend events anymore. Knew she wasn't visible. And invisibility in Vivian's world was the same as weakness. "What do you really want, Vivian?" Nathan asked, finally meeting her eyes. She smiled, soft, measured. "Honesty." It wasn't a lie, just incomplete. "I want to build something real," she continued. "Not sneak around hotel corridors.
Not pretend I don't exist after midnight." Nathan exhaled. "You know my situation."
"Yes," Vivian said gently. "And you know mine. I don't invest where there's no future." The word invest lingered between them. Vivian believed she was patient but not foolish. She had watched men like Nathan before, rise fast, believe they were untouchable, underestimate the women closest to them. She didn't see Charlotte as competition. She saw her as a placeholder, someone who had served her purpose and would eventually step aside. When Nathan's phone buzzed again, Vivian noticed his jaw tighten. "Her?" she asked lightly. He didn't answer. Vivian smiled into her glass, already certain of the outcome. Men like Nathan didn't leave marriages dramatically. They let them fade. They waited for the woman at home to give up first.
What Vivian didn't know, what she never bothered to imagine, was that Charlotte wasn't waiting. She was already gone. Charlotte left before the city fully woke up. The sky was still a dull gray when she closed the door behind her, the quiet click sounding final in a way that made her pause. For a moment, she rested her palm against the wood, breathing through the tightness in her chest. This was the last time she would stand here waiting for someone who never came home for her. She didn't take much. One suitcase, her phone, prenatal documents folded neatly inside a plain folder. The diamond earrings stayed behind, not because she didn't need them, but because they belonged to a version of her life that no longer existed. She left them where Nathan would have to see them, understand them. The driver she'd booked the night before waited at the curb, engine idling. Charlotte didn't look back at the building as she stepped inside the car. She had learned the hard way that looking back made it harder to move forward. As the car pulled into traffic, she watched the streets pass by. The corner cafe where she once waited for Nathan after work, the boutique she hadn't entered since her body began to change, the park bench where they'd argued quietly so strangers wouldn't notice. Each place carried a memory she refused to drag with her. Her phone buzzed. A text from Nathan. One line. Confused, annoyed, already defensive. Charlotte turned the phone face down and placed it beside her. Her hands rested protectively over her stomach as the baby shifted, a small but insistent reminder that she wasn't alone, even if it felt that way. The car merged onto the highway, the city shrinking behind them. For the first time in months, Charlotte let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. Not sobbing, not breaking down, just a steady release of tension, like unclenching a muscle she'd forgotten was tight. Leaving didn't feel empowering. It felt terrifying. But fear, she realized, didn't mean she was wrong. It meant she was choosing something unfamiliar. At a rest stop hours later, Charlotte stepped out into the cold air and sat on a bench, sipping water slowly. Her reflection in the darkened window startled her. She looked tired, older, but there was something else there too. Resolve, maybe, or simply the absence of pretending. She thought of the life she was walking away from, the dinners alone, the conversations that ended in silence, the way Nathan had stopped asking how she felt, assuming her presence meant she was fine. She wondered how long he would tell himself this was temporary. Probably a while. Charlotte knew she would be blamed, by his friends, by his colleagues, maybe even by people who had never lived a day in her marriage. Pregnant women weren't supposed to leave. Good wives were supposed to endure. She exhaled slowly. Good mothers protected their children. When the car finally pulled back onto the road, Charlotte didn't know exactly where she was going. She only knew where she wasn't staying. And for the first time since the betrayal became undeniable, that was enough to keep her moving forward. The first night alone was the hardest. Charlotte lay on a narrow motel bed, staring at a water-stained ceiling that flickered whenever a car passed outside. The room smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. It wasn't unsafe, but it wasn't comforting either. It was temporary. That was what she kept telling herself. Temporary didn't stop the shaking. Her phone sat on the nightstand, silent now. She had turned it off hours ago, after the third missed call and a voicemail she didn't have the strength to hear. The quiet pressed in on her ears until her own breathing felt too loud. She shifted carefully, trying to find a position that didn't pull at her back or tighten her chest. The baby moved. Charlotte's hand flew to her stomach instinctively, palm flat, grounding herself. "I'm here," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was reassuring, herself or the small life, depending on her steadiness. The movement eased, and she exhaled slowly, counting to 5 the way her doctor had taught her. Sleep came in fragments, short, shallow pieces broken by memories she didn't invite. Nathan's laugh at a charity dinner,
The way he checked his phone during their anniversary meal. The moment she realized she'd started rehearsing conversations before having them, afraid of being dismissed. When morning finally arrived, it felt abrupt. Sunlight crept through the thin curtains, revealing everything she couldn't ignore in the daylight. The single suitcase, the stack of medical papers, the reality that she had chosen uncertainty over familiarity. She sat up too quickly and felt the room tilt. Nausea surged, sharp and unforgiving. Charlotte pressed her forehead into her hands, breathing through it, waiting for the dizziness to pass. This wasn't just heartbreak. This was stress, hormones, fear. And fear, she learned, was physical. In the bathroom mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed red, hair pulled back without care. She looked like someone who had been surviving instead of living. The thought hurt more than she expected. She splashed cold water on her face and forced herself to eat a few crackers, even though her stomach resisted. Every small task felt monumental. Stand up. Sit down. Breathe evenly. Don't panic. For the first time since she'd left, doubt crept in. What if she couldn't do this alone? What if she had made a mistake? What if staying would have been easier? Charlotte closed her eyes, letting the questions rise and fall without answering them. She knew the truth, even if she didn't like it. Staying would have been familiar, but it would have been quieter, lonelier, and far more damaging in the long run. She picked up her phone, turned it on, and ignored the flood of notifications. Instead, she opened her calendar and circled one appointment in red. Prenatal checkup, 2 days. She needed to be strong until then. After that, she would figure out the rest. One step, one breath, one choice at a time. That was how survival began. Adrian Walker didn't ask how she was doing. That was the first thing Charlotte noticed. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe just outside Santa Monica, the late afternoon light slanting through the windows in soft, forgiving angles. Charlotte's hands rested around a mug she hadn't touched. Her shoulders were tense, braced for questions she didn't want to answer. Adrian didn't give her any. "You look like someone who made a hard decision," he said calmly. "Not a wrong one." Charlotte's throat tightened. She hadn't realized how badly she needed to hear that. They had known each other years ago, before Nathan, before Park Avenue and penthouses. Back when Charlotte was still working, still visible. She had helped Adrian redesign a small office space when his firm was barely surviving. They'd lost touch after her marriage, the way adult lives quietly drift apart. When she'd sent him a single email 2 nights ago, no details, just a request for a meeting, he hadn't hesitated. "I don't need rescuing," Charlotte said softly, almost defensively. Adrian nodded. "Good, because I don't rescue people." He took a sip of his coffee, unbothered by the silence that followed. "I help when I'm asked. I offer options. What you do with them is up to you." That was different, refreshing, disarming. Charlotte finally met his eyes. "I don't know what comes next." "Most people don't," Adrian replied. They just pretend they do until life proves otherwise. She almost laughed. He leaned back slightly, giving her space. You left a powerful man, pregnant, without a safety net you can see yet.
That doesn't make you reckless. It makes you honest. Charlotte felt something loosen in her chest. Not hope, not relief, just permission to breathe. I'm not here to talk about him, she said. I figured, Adrian replied. He's not the most interesting part of this story. That surprised her. What is? She asked. You, he said simply. What you can still build. He didn't offer money, didn't promise protection. Instead, he slid a slim folder across the table. Inside were contacts, project leads, names of people who remembered Charlotte's work before she disappeared into someone else's life. No strings, Adrian said. No loyalty tests. No expectations beyond professionalism. Charlotte stared at the folder. Why? Because you helped me once without asking what you'd get back, he said. And because I don't believe women become less capable when they're hurt. The words settled quietly, without drama. For the first time since she'd left New York, Charlotte didn't feel like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. She was still scared, still uncertain, but she wasn't alone in the way that hollowed you out. Adrian stood ready to leave. Think about it. Or don't. Either way, you're already moving forward. As he walked away, Charlotte placed a hand over her stomach, feeling a gentle kick beneath her palm. She wasn't being saved. She was being respected. And that changed everything. Charlotte's days began before sunrise. The small apartment she rented overlooked a narrow street lined with palm trees and cracked sidewalks, nothing like the glass and steel views she'd left behind. Still, the morning light was kind here. It crept in softly, warming the room instead of demanding attention. She learned to appreciate that. She set up her workspace at the dining table, a laptop, a notebook filled with sketches, a single framed photo of the ultrasound she'd almost forgotten to pack. There was no ceremony to it, no dramatic rebirth, just the quiet decision to work. The first project came through one of Adrian's contacts, a modest redesign for a family-owned firm relocating offices. The budget was tight, the timeline tighter. Charlotte accepted anyway. She needed momentum more than perfection. She worked through nausea, through back pain, through moments when doubt pressed so heavily it felt physical. There were afternoons she stared at the screen, hands hovering uselessly over the keyboard, wondering if she was foolish to believe she could do this while pregnant, alone, and emotionally raw. But then she would start again. One sketch led to another, one email turned into a call, the call turned into a meeting. Clients responded to her clarity, her attention to detail, her ability to listen without interrupting. She noticed something she'd forgotten about herself. She was good at this. At night, when the apartment grew quiet, Charlotte reviewed contracts and timelines while the city hummed faintly outside. She learned to manage her energy carefully. No wasted conversations, no emotional detours. Every choice felt deliberate now, shaped by the understanding that her time mattered. The baby seemed to sense it too. Each kick reminded her why she kept going, even when exhaustion tugged at her edges. She wasn't building a comeback story. She was building stability. And stability, she realized, was far more powerful. News from New York reached her eventually. A former colleague mentioned Nathan in passing during a call. Nothing specific, just stress, pressure, rumors of tension at the firm. Charlotte listened without reacting. The name didn't land the way it used to. It felt distant, like something she'd once read about in a book she no longer owned.
One evening, as she finalized a proposal for a larger project, Charlotte caught her reflection in the darkened screen. She looked different. Not happier, not healed, but focused, grounded in a way she hadn't been in years. She closed the laptop and rested back, one hand over her stomach, breathing through a wave of fatigue. For a brief moment, fear flickered, of money, of childbirth, of doing this wrong. Then it passed. She had learned something crucial over the past weeks. Strength didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated quietly, choice by choice, refusal by refusal.
Charlotte wasn't rebuilding to prove anyone wrong. She was rebuilding because she finally understood what she deserved and what she would never accept again. The realization didn't arrive like a thunderbolt. It crept in quietly, disguised as a detail that didn't quite make sense. Charlotte was reviewing a project proposal late one evening when an unfamiliar name caught her eye in an email thread forwarded by a client. The sender worked in risk consulting. The topic line referenced a fintech firm in New York, Nathan's company. Charlotte almost deleted it without reading. Almost. Curiosity won. She skimmed at first, detached, until a sentence pulled her up short. Strategic misalignment, internal pressure, leadership vulnerability. The phrasing was clinical, but the implications were anything but. She read it again, slower this time. The report suggested that recent decisions hadn't been reckless accidents. They were being nudged, guided, encouraged by someone inside Nathan's inner circle. Charlotte closed her laptop and leaned back, her pulse steady but alert. She didn't feel angry. She felt awake. Over the next few days, she paid attention, carefully, discreetly. Conversations with clients in finance revealed patterns, investments that didn't add up, partnerships that carried hidden liabilities. And always, threaded through it all, was the same name, Vivian Hart. Charlotte hadn't thought about Vivian in weeks. She hadn't needed to. Now, the pieces began to align. Vivian wasn't just a distraction. She wasn't just an affair. She was influence. She attended meetings under the guise of branding strategy. She framed risky moves as bold. She praised Nathan's ambition while quietly steering him toward decisions that weakened his control. Charlotte felt a chill settle beneath her ribs. She remembered the nights Nathan had come home agitated, defensive, dismissive. How he'd insisted on changes that didn't feel right. How he'd brushed off Charlotte's questions as emotional noise. She had assumed he was arrogant. Now she understood he was being played. The irony wasn't lost on her. Charlotte could have warned him, could have sent an anonymous message, could have reached out through back channels and saved him from what was coming. She didn't. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because it wasn't her job anymore. She sat quietly at her desk, hands resting on her stomach, and thought about the difference between responsibility and rescue. Nathan had made choices. He had ignored her voice when it mattered. He had trusted someone who reflected his ambition instead of his values. The consequences belonged to him. Still, Charlotte wasn't indifferent. She began documenting what she learned. Dates, connections, overlaps. Not to expose anyone, yet, but to understand the landscape. Knowledge, she'd learned, was a form of safety. One afternoon, Adrian called. "You're not imagining it," he said after she shared her suspicions. "This has been circulating quietly. No one wanted to say it out loud." "Why?" Charlotte asked. "Because men like Nathan don't like admitting they've lost control." Charlotte smiled faintly. For the first time since leaving New York, she felt the ground shift beneath the story she thought she knew. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about power, who wielded it, who surrendered it,
and who learned to walk away before it consumed them. She closed her notebook, calm settling over her like armor. Whatever was coming, she would not be caught unaware again. Nathan Cole sensed it before anyone said a word. The boardroom on Park Avenue felt colder that morning, though the temperature hadn't changed. Glass walls reflected the skyline, sharp and unforgiving, and for the first time, Nathan felt exposed sitting at the head of the table. Conversations paused when he entered, not out of respect, out of calculation. He cleared his throat and launched into the agenda, speaking with the confidence that had always carried him through uncertainty. Quarterly projections, expansion plans, strategic optimism. Heads nodded, but the nods felt automatic, detached. Halfway through, one of the senior partners interrupted him. "Before we move on," the man said evenly, "we need to address recent concerns." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Concerns about what?" "Decision-making," another voice added. "Risk exposure. Influence." The word landed hard. Nathan glanced instinctively toward Vivian, seated a few chairs down, immaculate and composed. She met his gaze with a calm smile that was just a fraction too slow. "We've been bold," Nathan said. "That's how growth happens." "No," the partner replied. "That's how overconfidence happens." The room fell silent. For the first time, Nathan felt something he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge in years: uncertainty about his own authority. He pushed back, citing data, defending strategy, dismissing doubt. But the resistance he met wasn't emotional. It was procedural. Documents were slid across the table, numbers highlighted, patterns revealed. Nathan recognized the signs too late. After the meeting, Vivian caught up with him in the corridor, heels clicking softly against marble. "They're nervous," she said lightly. "You know how conservative they are." Nathan exhaled. "They're questioning me." Vivian's hand brushed his arm. "Then remind them why they need you." He nodded, reassured by her confidence, unaware of how carefully she measured every reaction. Across the country, Charlotte read the same signs from a distance. A former client forwarded her an article, speculative, cautious, but unmistakable. Nathan's firm was under quiet scrutiny. Nothing public yet, but cracks were forming. Charlotte set the phone down, her expression unreadable. She didn't feel triumph. She felt clarity. That night, Nathan returned to the penthouse alone. The silence greeted him again, but this time it felt accusatory. He poured a drink he didn't want and stood by the window, staring down at the city that had once made him feel invincible. For the first time, he wondered if Charlotte had seen this coming. The thought unsettled him more than the board's doubts. Because if she had, if she'd understood the weakness beneath his confidence, then her leaving hadn't been impulsive. It had been strategic. Nathan checked his phone. No messages from her, no updates, no reaction. Just absence. And somewhere deep beneath the layers of ambition and denial, a truth began to surface, quiet, unavoidable, and terrifying. Charlotte hadn't walked away from a failing marriage. She'd walked away before everything else began to fall. The pain started just after midnight. Charlotte woke to a sharp tightening low in her abdomen, sudden enough to steal her breath. For a few seconds, she lay still, waiting for it to fade, telling herself it was nothing more than discomfort. She had learned not to panic at every unfamiliar sensation. But then it came again, stronger this time, deeper. The kind of pain that didn't ask permission. She pushed herself upright slowly, one hand braced against the mattress, the other pressed protectively over her stomach. The room was dark, quiet except for the faint hum of traffic outside.
Her heart began to race, each beat loud in her ears. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She counted her breaths the way she'd practiced. In, out. But the pressure didn't ease. Instead, a wave of dizziness followed, making the edges of the room blur. Charlotte swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, immediately regretting it. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Panic surged, hot, irrational, impossible to ignore. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers. For a split second, Nathan's name flashed through her mind. Habit, muscle memory. Then it was gone. She called the clinic's emergency line. The nurse's voice was calm, professional, grounding. "I need you to sit down," she said. "Have you felt any bleeding, any severe cramping?" Charlotte answered between shallow breaths, her voice shaking despite her effort to keep it steady. "Listen to me," the nurse continued. "This could be stress-induced contractions. It happens. But given what you've been through, I want you to go to the hospital now." The words settled like ice in Charlotte's chest. She packed quickly, movements mechanical. Shoes, jacket, medical folder. Every step felt heavier than the last. By the time the ride arrived, sweat clung to her skin despite the cool night air. The hospital lights were blinding. Charlotte lay on the gurney, monitors being attached, voices moving around her in practiced efficiency. She stared at the ceiling, tears slipping silently into her hairline as fear finally broke through her control. What if she'd waited too long? What if leaving, working, pushing herself had put her baby at risk? The thought nearly shattered her. A doctor appeared at her side, gentle but serious. "Your blood pressure is high," he said. "We're going to keep you for observation." Hours passed in fragments. Tests, questions, reassurances that didn't quite soothe the tightness in her chest. Finally, as dawn began to soften the edges of the night, the doctor returned. "The baby's stable," he said. "But you're not out of the woods. You need rest, real rest. Stress is no longer an option." Charlotte nodded weakly, relief and exhaustion crashing over her at once. When she was finally alone, she pressed both hands to her stomach, tears flowing freely now. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm trying, I promise." The baby kicked, firm and unmistakable. Charlotte let out a shaky laugh through her tears. She hadn't lost everything, but she came dangerously close. And in that hospital room, with machines humming softly around her, Charlotte understood something with painful clarity. From this moment on, survival wasn't enough. She had to choose her battles carefully because now, more than ever, everything truly mattered. Charlotte was discharged 2 days later with strict instructions and a quiet warning she couldn't ignore. "Your body has been carrying more than a pregnancy," the doctor told her gently. "It's been carrying pressure, fear. You can't keep pushing like this." The words followed her home. Back in the apartment, Charlotte moved more slowly, deliberately. She placed her bag down, set her phone on the counter, and sat at the small table where she'd been working night after night. The space looked different now, less like a lifeline, more like a reminder of how close she'd come to losing control. She opened her laptop, then closed it again. For the first time since leaving New York, Charlotte allowed herself to stop. That afternoon, Adrian called. "I heard you were in the hospital," he said, his tone steady but concerned. "I'm fine," Charlotte replied. "The baby's fine." "That's not what I asked." She hesitated. "I'm rethinking things." "Good," Adrian said, "because what you've been doing isn't sustainable." Charlotte leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling.
I don't know how to balance all of this. You don't, Adrian said, not alone.
And not all at once. They met later that evening, walking slowly along a quiet stretch of beach. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in muted colors. Charlotte wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself as the cool air settled in. I don't want to disappear again, she said quietly. I won't go back to being invisible. You won't, Adrian replied. But strength isn't about speed. It's about timing. He stopped walking and turned to face her. You have leverage, Charlotte, skill, insight, and something else most people don't realize yet. Perspective. She frowned. What does that mean? It means you don't need to win every battle to secure the outcome, he said. Sometimes the smartest move is letting the right people underestimate you. The words resonated deeper than she expected. That night, Charlotte made a choice. She scaled back her workload, delegated what she could, declined projects that demanded urgency over care. It felt counterintuitive, like stepping off a moving train. But with each decision, her chest felt lighter. She began documenting everything she'd learned about Nathan's company more carefully now. Not obsessively, strategically. Dates, patterns, connections. She didn't intend to use the information immediately. She intended to be ready. The next morning, Charlotte sat by the window, sunlight warming her face, one hand resting on her stomach. The baby moved, calm and steady. She smiled softly. For weeks, she had been reacting to betrayal, to fear, to survival. Now, for the first time, she was choosing direction. Charlotte wasn't running anymore. She was positioning herself. And somewhere between the sound of the waves outside and the quiet certainty in her chest, she understood this truth with absolute clarity. The most powerful comeback doesn't announce itself. It waits. Charlotte didn't announce her return to the world. She let it happen quietly. Weeks passed after the hospital scare, and from the outside, her life appeared smaller. Fewer meetings, shorter workdays, long walks in the early morning when the beach was nearly empty. Anyone watching might have mistaken restraint for retreat. They would have been wrong. Behind the calm routine, Charlotte's mind was sharper than it had ever been. Rest had given her clarity. Distance had given her objectivity. And pain. Pain had stripped away every illusion she once held about loyalty, power, and love. She reviewed what she knew again, this time without emotion clouding her judgment. Nathan's company wasn't collapsing yet. It was wobbling. That mattered. Companies didn't fall from a single mistake. They fell from patterns. Charlotte had spent years beside Nathan, watching how he made decisions, how he reacted under pressure, how easily he dismissed concerns that didn't align with his confidence. Vivian had understood that weakness perfectly. Charlotte saw it now with unsettling clarity. Vivian hadn't pushed recklessly. She had nudged, encouraged Nathan's worst instincts while reinforcing his belief that he was untouchable. Every risky expansion, every questionable partnership, each one framed as visionary leadership. Charlotte exhaled slowly, fingers resting on the edge of her notebook. She didn't need to expose Vivian publicly, not yet. The truth didn't require drama to be effective. It required timing. Adrian noticed the shift in her almost immediately. "You're thinking several moves ahead," he said one afternoon, as they reviewed a project together. "Most people don't do that after what you've been through." "I don't have the luxury of reacting anymore," Charlotte replied. "I have a child who deserves stability." "And justice?" Adrian asked gently. Charlotte paused. "Justice will come,
but not the way people expect. That night, alone in her apartment, Charlotte drafted an email she didn't send. It was addressed to someone she hadn't spoken to in years, a former legal advisor connected to Nathan's early business days. She saved it, then closed the laptop. Not yet. She lay back on the couch, one hand over her stomach, the other resting on her chest as the baby moved. The sensation grounded her, reminded her of what truly mattered. For the first time since the betrayal, Charlotte felt something close to certainty.
She wasn't doing this to hurt Nathan. She was doing this to ensure he could never hurt her or her child again. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room. Charlotte watched the light fade, her expression calm, almost serene. People often misunderstood strength, she realized. They expected it to be loud, vengeful, immediate. But real strength waited. It observed, and when the moment came, it acted with precision. Charlotte closed her eyes, breathing evenly, her mind already aligned with what was coming next. The fire hadn't gone out. She had simply learned how to contain it. The first headline didn't mention Nathan Cole by name. That was how it always started. Charlotte read the article on her phone while sitting at the kitchen table, sunlight pooling across the floor. The tone was cautious, almost polite. Questions about market volatility, concerns over internal governance, unnamed sources hinting at strategic instability within a prominent fintech firm. To an outsider, it looked like nothing. To Charlotte, it looked like a crack. She set the phone down and exhaled slowly. This wasn't chaos. This was pressure. And pressure, when applied steadily, exposed every weakness underneath. In New York, Nathan felt it immediately. The calls came earlier than usual, advisors asking for clarification, investors requesting reassurance, meetings that ran longer with fewer smiles and more silence. He told himself it was temporary, a cycle. Markets fluctuated. Confidence was contagious. If he projected enough of it, the doubt would disappear. But doubt, he was learning, didn't vanish. It waited. Vivian, meanwhile, remained unbothered. She sat in Nathan's office one afternoon, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone while he paced. "You're overreacting," she said calmly. "This is what disruption looks like. People get nervous before they get impressed." Nathan stopped pacing. "The board is requesting an internal review." Vivian looked up, eyebrows lifting slightly. "That's not a bad thing. It shows transparency." Her composure reassured him. It always had. He didn't notice how carefully she avoided specifics, how she never volunteered solutions, only encouragement. Charlotte noticed everything. Through quiet conversations and carefully timed inquiries, she watched the dominoes align. The same partners who once praised Nathan's boldness were now asking for safeguards. The same risks Vivian had framed as visionary were being reframed as liabilities. Charlotte didn't intervene. She didn't leak information or fan the flames. She let the truth surface on its own. One evening, Adrian called with an update. They're scheduling a closed-door session next week. No press, no announcements. Charlotte nodded, even though he couldn't see her. That's when decisions get made. "Are you ready?" he asked. She glanced down at her stomach, feeling a gentle movement beneath her palm. "I've been ready for a while." In Manhattan, Nathan returned home late, the penthouse colder than usual despite the heat. He poured a drink and stood by the window, staring down at the city that once made him feel invincible. For the first time, he wondered whether Charlotte had seen this coming long before he did. The thought unsettled him. He reached for his phone, hovering over her name.
Then he stopped. Pride intervened. Habit. Fear. Across the country, Charlotte closed her notebook and turned off the light. The fall hadn't arrived yet, but it had begun. And this time, she wasn't standing beneath it. She was watching from a safe distance. Charlotte hadn't planned on seeing Nathan again so soon. The invitation arrived by email, forwarded through a professional contact with a brief note attached. Thought you should be there. It was for a private finance summit at the Plaza Hotel, the kind of event where decisions were made quietly over wine and smiles, where reputations shifted without headlines. Charlotte stared at the screen for a long moment. She could decline, stay invisible, let the collapse continue without her presence. Instead, she accepted. The night of the event, Charlotte stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Not out of vanity, out of intention. She chose a simple black dress, elegant without trying. No statement jewelry, no need to impress. Her hair was pulled back cleanly, exposing her face, her calm. This wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. When she stepped into the ballroom, the low murmur of conversation washed over her. Crystal chandeliers reflected soft light across polished floors. The air smelled of citrus and expensive perfume. People turned, glancing at her, registering something familiar they couldn't quite place. Nathan was near the center of the room. He looked thinner, tighter, his posture still confident, but strained at the edges, like a man holding himself together through willpower alone. When his eyes landed on Charlotte, the effect was immediate. He froze. For a split second, the room disappeared. Charlotte felt it too, the echo of a life once shared, the ghost of conversations unfinished. But the sensation passed quickly, replaced by something steadier. She didn't stop walking, she didn't hesitate. Nathan stepped toward her, disbelief written plainly across his face. Charlotte? She met his gaze evenly. Nathan. The simplicity unsettled him more than anger would have. I didn't know you were in town, he said. I wasn't, she replied. I am now. Around them, conversations slowed, curiosity sharpening. Nathan gestured toward a quieter corner, instinctively protective of his image. Charlotte followed, not for his sake, but because it was easier. You disappeared, he said once they were alone. You didn't answer, you didn't. I left, Charlotte corrected. There's a difference. His jaw tightened. You could have talked to me. She studied him for a moment, really looked at him. The man she once loved. The man who had chosen differently. I did, she said calmly. You just didn't listen. Nathan exhaled sharply. Things are complicated right now. I know, Charlotte replied. That's why I'm here. The words landed heavier than she intended. Nathan searched her face as if looking for a crack, for anger, regret, longing. He found none, only composure. You look well, he said finally. Charlotte placed a hand gently over her stomach. I am. Across the room, Vivian watched them, her smile faltering as realization set in. Charlotte didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her presence alone had already changed the balance. And for the first time since leaving, Nathan understood something too late. She hadn't returned to him. She had returned to his world on her own terms. Charlotte didn't stay close to Nathan after that first exchange. She didn't need to. From across the ballroom, she watched the dynamics shift as subtly as tides. Conversations curved toward her. People she hadn't spoken to in years approached with cautious warmth, curious but respectful. No one asked where she'd been. They didn't need to. Her presence answered the question. Nathan noticed it too. Every time someone glanced from him to Charlotte, his shoulders tightened. He smiled when spoken to, laughed at the right moments, but the ease he once wore like armor was gone. He was reacting now, not leading. Vivian felt it most sharply. She joined Nathan's side with a practiced ease, her hand slipping around his arm as if to mark territory. Up close, Charlotte could see the calculation in her eyes, measuring, adjusting, reassessing. Vivian wasn't angry. She was threatened. That made her dangerous. "Charlotte," Vivian said, voice smooth. "It's been a while." Charlotte inclined her head politely. "It has." Vivian's smile sharpened. "I hope you're doing well." "I am," Charlotte replied. No elaboration, no challenge. Nathan cleared his throat. "We were just discussing upcoming restructuring." Charlotte met his gaze. "I've heard." The pause that followed was brief but telling. "You've heard?" Vivian echoed lightly. "Yes," Charlotte said. "It's a small world." She excused herself before either of them could respond, leaving uncertainty in her wake like a shadow. She didn't need to accuse. She didn't need to explain. Letting them wonder was far more effective. Later that evening, Adrian joined her near the terrace doors, the city lights spread out beyond the glass like a map of possibilities. "They're rattled," he murmured. "Especially him." Charlotte nodded. "Good. Are you ready for the next step?" She didn't answer immediately. Her hand rested over her stomach, grounding her. "Yes, but we do this cleanly." Adrian smiled faintly. "Always." Across the room, Nathan argued quietly with Vivian, their voices low but urgent. Charlotte caught fragments, pressure, loyalty, timing. Vivian's confidence faltered for the first time, replaced by irritation she struggled to conceal. Charlotte felt no satisfaction in it, only confirmation. As the event wound down, she made her way toward the exit. Nathan intercepted her near the doors, desperation breaking through his composure. "Charlotte, wait." She turned. "You can't just show up and disappear again," he said. "If there's something you know—" "There is," she replied calmly. "But it's not my job to save you." His face tightened. "You owe me a conversation." "I don't owe you anything," Charlotte said gently. "But you owe yourself honesty." She stepped past him, leaving him standing there, surrounded by people, yet suddenly alone. Outside, the night air was cool and steady. Charlotte breathed it in, feeling lighter with each step. The trap hadn't been sprung, but it was set. And this time, she wouldn't be caught inside it. The collapse didn't happen in public. It happened behind closed doors, where there were no cameras to soften the blow. Nathan sat at the long conference table, hands clasped tightly, as the board's legal counsel finished speaking. The room felt smaller than it had an hour ago, the glass walls now reflecting his own strained expression back at him. "The issue isn't one bad decision," the attorney said calmly. "It's a pattern, and the pattern points to internal manipulation." Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears. Manipulation by who? There was a pause, then a name. Vivian Hart. The word landed like a physical strike. Across the table, files were opened, emails projected. Timelines connected with ruthless clarity, recommendations Vivian had pushed, risks she had framed as brilliance. Side communications with third-party investors who stood to benefit if Nathan lost control. Nathan's chest tightened. "That's not possible," he said, even as doubt flooded in. "She wouldn't." "She did,"
the attorney replied gently. And she did it using your authority. The realization was devastating. Vivian hadn't just stood beside him. She had stood in front of him, shaping his decisions while reinforcing his belief that everything was under control. And he had let her, because she made him feel powerful when others questioned him. When the meeting adjourned, Nathan didn't speak. He walked back to his office in silence, each step heavier than the last. Vivian was waiting for him, perched confidently on the edge of his desk.
"They are overreacting," she said, smiling. "I heard things went well."
Nathan closed the door behind him. "Did they?" he asked quietly. Vivian's smile faltered, just for a second. He stepped closer. "How long?" She straightened. "Nathan, you're under pressure. You're looking for someone to blame. Answer the question." The silence stretched. Finally, Vivian exhaled. "You were drifting," she said. "You needed direction. I gave you that. You used me." "I optimized you," she corrected. "This is how power works." Nathan laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "You destroyed my company." Vivian tilted her head. "You destroyed it the moment you stopped listening to the people who actually cared about you." The words burned because they were true. She gathered her things without another glance, heels clicking confidently as she walked out. By the time the door closed behind her, Nathan felt something inside him collapse completely. Hours later, alone in the dark office, he stared at his reflection in the window. For the first time, he saw himself clearly, not as a visionary, not as a victim, but as a man who had traded loyalty for ego and paid the price. Across the country, Charlotte read the update Adrian sent with a single line attached. "It's done. They know everything." She closed her eyes, breathing evenly. There was no triumph in her chest, only release. The truth had finally surfaced, not because she exposed it, but because it was always there, waiting. And now, there was nothing left for Nathan to hide behind. Nathan Cole packed his office in silence. The assistants had already cleared out. The board had been efficient, polite even, but final. His access was limited, his authority suspended pending formal transition. The company he once believed was an extension of his identity now felt like a building he no longer recognized. He removed a framed photo from his desk and studied it for a moment. A gala night years ago, Charlotte beside him, smiling softly, her hand resting on his arm as if anchoring him. He turned the frame face down and placed it carefully into a box. The elevator ride down felt longer than it ever had. Outside, Manhattan moved on without him. Taxis honked. Pedestrians rushed past, eyes fixed on their own destinations. Nathan stood on the sidewalk for a moment, unsure where to go. The penthouse no longer felt like home. The bars felt hollow. The people he'd once relied on were suddenly unavailable. He called Charlotte. The call went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. That night, Nathan sat alone in a dim apartment he'd rented temporarily, scrolling through news he already knew by heart. Analysts debated leadership failures. Commentators spoke of cautionary tales. No one mentioned love. No one mentioned loyalty. They didn't need to. Across the country, Charlotte prepared for something far more important. The hospital room was warm, softly lit. Machines hummed gently, steady and reassuring. Charlotte breathed through the contractions with quiet focus, her grip firm on the bed rail. Adrian stood nearby, not intrusive, not distant, ready when needed. "You're doing great," the nurse said calmly. Charlotte nodded, sweat at her temples, pain sharp but purposeful.
Each breath carried her closer to something real, something earned. Hours later, as dawn broke pale and patient through the window, the cry filled the room.
Charlotte laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed and present. The nurse placed the baby against her chest, warm and solid and impossibly small. Charlotte's hands trembled as she held her child, tears blurring her vision. "I've got you," she whispered. "I won't fail you." In that moment, everything else fell away. The betrayal, the fear, the long nights of doubt. This was the reward. Not wealth, not revenge, not vindication, but something far deeper. Life, purpose, continuity. Later, when the room was quiet and the baby slept peacefully beside her, Charlotte checked her phone. A single missed call. Nathan. She didn't feel anger. She felt distance. She typed a brief message and sent it without hesitation. "I hope you find peace. Please don't contact me again." She turned the phone face down and reached for her child. Outside, the sun rose fully now, casting light across the room.
Charlotte watched it quietly, understanding something with perfect clarity. Nathan would live with the consequences of his choices, and she would live with the future she had chosen, earned through courage, restraint, and the strength to walk away. The weeks after the birth moved differently. Time no longer felt like something Charlotte had to chase or control. It flowed around the quiet rhythms of feeding, sleeping, and learning a new human being, one breath at a time. Nights blurred into mornings. Exhaustion settled deep into her bones, but it was honest exhaustion, the kind that came from caring, not enduring. She named her daughter Elena. The name felt strong, steady, something that could grow with a child who would one day ask hard questions and expect real answers. Charlotte's apartment filled slowly with life. A bassinet by the window, soft blankets folded carefully on the couch, a stack of unopened mail she didn't rush to sort through. The world outside could wait. For once, it didn't demand her attention. Adrian visited occasionally, never overstaying, never crossing lines. He brought groceries, checked in, asked what she needed, not what he could offer. There was comfort in that restraint. Trust built quietly, without pressure or promises. One afternoon, as Charlotte rocked Elena gently, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She didn't answer. Later, she learned it was Nathan. He tried again the following week, and the week after that. She never responded, not because she was cruel, but because closure had already happened. News from New York continued to surface, filtered through distance and time. Nathan's company finalized its restructuring. His name faded from headlines, replaced by newer stories, sharper ambitions, younger faces. The world had moved on with unsettling speed. Charlotte felt no satisfaction in that. She felt something better. Freedom. She returned to work gradually, selectively. Projects that respected her boundaries, clients who valued her perspective. Her reputation grew, not explosively, but steadily. People trusted her. And trust, she learned, was far more durable than admiration. One evening, as she sat by the window watching the sky soften into dusk, Adrian stood beside her. Elena slept peacefully in her arms. "You know," he said quietly, "you don't have to do everything alone anymore." Charlotte looked at him, really looked. Not as a lifeline, not as a replacement, but as a man who had stood beside her without trying to own her story. "I know," she said. That was all. Across the country, Nathan sat in a much smaller apartment, scrolling through photos he hadn't taken. Smiling strangers, other people's children, lives continuing without him. For the first time, he understood the full cost of his choices. He had lost more than a marriage. He had lost the chance to grow alongside someone who loved him when he was still becoming himself. Charlotte kissed her daughter's forehead and smiled softly. She hadn't won. She'd been rewarded. With peace, with purpose, with a future built on her own terms. And that was something no betrayal could ever take from her. A year later, Charlotte stood barefoot on the balcony of her new home, the morning air cool against her skin. Below, the city moved at a gentler pace than Manhattan ever had. Sunlight filtered through the trees lining the street, and somewhere nearby, a child laughed. The sound felt like a promise. Elena slept inside, curled peacefully in her crib.
Charlotte watched her through the open door for a moment, chest tightening with a familiar warmth. This life, quiet, intentional, real, was not something she had imagined during the darkest nights. It was something she had earned. Her work had settled into a rhythm that fit her, not the other way around. She chose projects that mattered, clients who respected boundaries. Her name carried weight now, not because of who she was married to, but because of what she delivered. Independence felt less like defiance and more like alignment. Adrian arrived later that afternoon, carrying groceries and an easy smile. He had become part of their routine without ever demanding space in it. No grand gestures, no rushed declarations, just consistency, presence, patience. They sat together at the kitchen table while Elena napped, sunlight pooling between their hands.
"I've been offered a long-term partnership," Charlotte said casually. "It would mean staying here permanently." Adrian nodded. "How do you feel about that?" She didn't hesitate. "At home." He smiled, not triumphant, not possessive, just relieved. Months later, when Charlotte married again, it wasn't a spectacle. There were no headlines, no luxury venues, no performance for people who didn't know her story. Just a small ceremony by the ocean, Elena toddling between guests, laughter carried by the wind, vows spoken quietly, meant only for the people living them. Charlotte didn't think about Nathan that day. Not once. Somewhere else, in a city that no longer defined her, he continued his life, smaller, quieter, marked by what-ifs and regrets that never fully healed. There was no dramatic punishment waiting for him, just the slow realization that opportunities lost through arrogance rarely returned. That, Charlotte understood, was consequence enough. As the sun set over the water, Charlotte held Elena close and watched Adrian speak with friends, his laughter unforced, his presence steady. Love no longer felt like endurance. It felt like partnership. She thought back to the night she left, to the diamond earrings on the table, to the letter written without tears. That version of herself had been brave without knowing how strong she would become. Charlotte smiled. She hadn't been rescued. She had rebuilt. And in doing so, she gained more than justice, more than peace, more than love. She gained a life that fit her, one honest choice at a time. So, the story has come to an end.
And if you're still here with us at this very moment, then maybe, just maybe, something in this journey touched your heart in a quiet, personal way. What this story reminds us is simple, but not easy. We cannot control betrayal, loss, or other people's choices, but we can always control who we become afterward. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote,
You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Charlotte didn't heal because the world became kind to her. She healed because she chose dignity over resentment, clarity over chaos, and purpose over fear. Another Stoic truth says, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." There was no screaming victory, no dramatic punishment, only quiet consequences and a life rebuilt with intention. And that is often the most profound form of justice. If you're listening to this story while carrying your own heartbreak, uncertainty, or silent struggle, know this. Walking away does not mean you lost. It may mean you finally chose yourself. Healing isn't loud, growth isn't rushed, and peace often arrives only after courage. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories that heal, remind, and empower. And thank you for staying until the very end.